You even brought your mother into this? The cold, harsh voice echoed through the entryway of the quiet suburban home. Immediately after, a sharp, dry smack sliced through the air. I stood silently, watching the scene unfold through the crack of the front door left slightly ajar. On the cold hardwood floor lay my daughter Clara. She was pressing both hands against her reddened cheek, her shoulders trembling without making a sound. Scattered around her feet was the homemade casserole I had packed for her in a glass Pyrex dish. The glass had shattered, and the food was strewn ruthlessly across the floor. Towering over my daughter was her husband, Harrison Sterling. The picture-perfect corporate smile he had flashed at me just minutes prior was completely gone. He was yanking at his expensive silk tie, his chest heaving. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with rage at a wife who wasn't behaving exactly as he demanded. I didn't scream. I didn't rush in crying out to ask what he was doing to my daughter. Instead, I quietly and firmly tightened my grip on the strap of my black leather purse. My fingertips had grown cold, but my mind was as clear and sharp as solid ice. Harrison noticed me watching through the crack in the door. "Eleanor," he stammered. For a split second, his facade of the perfect husband tried to resurface. But consumed by his lingering rage, he quickly clicked his tongue and glared at me. "What, did you come back for your wallet?" Harrison spat, treating me like a nuisance. "Actually, perfect timing. Tell Clara to get a grip. I pay the bills around here, yet she has the nerve to complain just because I showed off a little in front of her mother. It's completely out of line." Harrison thought he had won. He assumed I would just cry, apologize, and sweep this under the rug. Up until now, I had always forced a polite smile and let things slide to keep the peace in their household. I knew better than anyone that my silence had only inflated his ego. But Harrison was completely unaware of what was about to happen. Standing diagonally behind me, hidden in the dim shadows of the porch, was another person. "You certainly have a lot of nerve, Harrison." A low, authoritative voice resonated from behind me. The moment Harrison heard that voice, the color completely drained from his face. His eyes widened in absolute terror, as if he had just seen a ghost. Stepping slowly forward from beside me was an older gentleman dressed impeccably in a tailored gray suit. His eyes were calm but piercing. This was Richard Caldwell, the chief executive officer of Apex Logistics, the corporate firm where Harrison worked. Harrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Mr. Caldwell, what are you doing here?" The arrogant tyrant from a few seconds ago was completely gone. Harrison's knees shook violently, looking as if he might collapse at any moment. It was no surprise. His mind was likely in a state of sheer panic, trying to comprehend why the CEO of his company was standing on his doorstep on a weekend night with his mother-in-law. I had indeed returned because I forgot my wallet. An hour earlier, the three of us had dined at an upscale steakhouse downtown. Harrison had booked the most expensive table, claiming it was to celebrate his recent promotion. He was incredibly rude to the waitstaff, but to me, he offered nothing but smiles and poured my wine. Clara had kept her head down the entire time, barely touching her food. When the meal ended and I reached for my wallet, Harrison waved his hands dramatically to stop me. "Eleanor, please, this is on me. Clara's mother is like my own mother." The words sounded beautiful. However, his eyes were entirely devoid of warmth. I kept that uneasy feeling to myself, walked them back to their house, and said my goodbyes at the door. It was only then I realized my wallet was missing from my purse and turned back. On my walk back, a car pulled over. It was Richard Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell was a former protege of my late husband, Arthur. When Arthur was still alive, Mr. Caldwell would often visit our home to share a drink on the patio. He considered my husband a mentor who had shaped his career. When Mr. Caldwell spotted me from his car, he hurried out. Skipping the usual pleasantries, he looked deeply troubled and said, "Eleanor, there's actually something regarding Harrison that I need to bring to your attention." The words that came out of the CEO's mouth were unbelievable. He revealed that Harrison had been spreading a massive lie about me at the corporate office. Halfway through his explanation, I remembered my wallet. When I apologized and said I needed to return to the house, Mr. Caldwell insisted on driving me back. And when we arrived at the door, we heard the yelling. Harrison covered his face with trembling hands and slumped straight down onto the floor. He dropped to his knees, pressing his hands against the hardwood in a posture of total surrender. "Mr. Caldwell, you've got it all wrong. This is a misunderstanding. Clara was just being hysterical, and..." Clara, still on the floor, looked back and forth between Harrison and me in shock. I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope Mr. Caldwell had handed me in the car. I placed it quietly on the floor right in front of the trembling Harrison. We can take our time discussing whether this is a misunderstanding, Harrison, I said. My voice was so cold and transparent it surprised even me. Let's talk about the medical diagnosis of my supposed terminal illness and the massive surgery bills you submitted to your HR department. Harrison's shoulders jolted violently. Clara let out a gasp, staring at her husband in sheer disbelief. Harrison had thought he was untouchable. He controlled his wife through violence and verbal abuse, put on a charming face for me, and secretly siphoned money from his company behind the scenes. He thought his plan was flawless, but he made a fatal miscalculation. He didn't know that his CEO was a former protege of Clara's father, someone with deep ties to our family. He also made the mistake of assuming I was just a weak, silent old woman who would endure anything. I gently helped my daughter sit up. Her body was freezing. On her thin wrists, I saw several dark bruises she had desperately tried to conceal with makeup. The moment I saw those marks, I felt a quiet, raging fire ignite in the depths of my soul. At that moment, Harrison didn't yet understand true terror. He didn't realize that his corporate lies wouldn't end as mere excuses for his debt, nor did he grasp just how much I was about to take back from him. The only sound in the dead silence of the entryway was the ticking of the wall clock. I held my trembling daughter and slowly helped her to her feet. Her body felt shockingly light and fragile. She used to be such a bright, cheerful girl with a healthy glow. Now, the woman in my arms felt like a terrified little bird. "Clara, are you okay?" "It's over now," I whispered. Even with my support, her eyes remained hollow. She simply kept her gaze desperately averted from her husband on the floor. The cold draft from the doorway swept over our feet. Mr. Caldwell looked down quietly at Harrison. "This is no place to talk. Harrison, invite us inside." It wasn't just a request from a boss. It carried a quiet, absolute weight that couldn't be defied. Harrison's face remained pale as he practically crawled to his feet, leading us into the living room as if trying to escape. When the living room lights flicked on, the space looked unnaturally pristine. Not a single item was out of place on the hardwood floors. High-end furniture was arranged symmetrically, yet it completely lacked the warmth of a family. It looked like a model home built solely for display. My eyes landed on a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was an old picture of my late husband, Arthur, laughing with Clara when she was a little girl. Arthur passed away from an illness 10 years ago. He was an earnest, somewhat clumsy man, but he valued his family above everything else. On his days off, he tended to the yard and protected our home with pride. Eleanor, Clara's smile is our greatest treasure. He used to say that with crinkled eyes while sipping coffee on the back porch. I raised Clara single-handedly in the suburban home Arthur left behind. Every morning, I lit a candle by his urn, praying for him to watch over us. I worked tirelessly so Clara would never feel deprived. When Clara brought Harrison home, I felt profound relief. "Eleanor, I promised to protect Clara for the rest of my life." I had foolishly believed the earnest look in Harrison's eyes that day. I thought this upstanding young man would protect my daughter in Arthur's place. Because of that, I turned a blind eye to the subtle red flags. The uneasy feelings began about a year into their marriage. Whenever they visited for Thanksgiving or Christmas, Harrison's words carried a hidden barb. "Clara is just so inefficient. I always end up picking up the slack. She stays home all day and still can't cook a simple roast." My heart ached when he laughed and said those things in front of our relatives. Still, I forced a smile and apologized for her clumsiness. I told myself that a parent shouldn't interfere in a marriage. I worried about neighborhood gossip and social appearances. I convinced myself that I mustn't ruin my daughter's standing as a wife. I swallowed my words, believing that as long as I didn't make waves, their household would run smoothly. I dipped into my retirement savings to send them gift baskets. I ignored the depressed tone in Clara's voice over the phone. I truly believed that was my duty as a mother. There were nights I sat in front of Arthur's urn, gripping my bank statements and worrying. But I was so terribly wrong. The more I endured in silence, the stronger Harrison's control became. Clara stopped taking off her long-sleeved cardigans even in the middle of summer. She started flinching and checking Harrison's mood whenever I was around, and today, he threw the food I made onto the floor. I cursed myself for knowing all of this and failing to take decisive action sooner. Taking a seat on the sofa, Mr. Caldwell stared Harrison down. Harrison stood frozen in the corner of the room, too paralyzed to even wipe the cold sweat from his forehead. "Harrison, I hear you've been going through a lot of hardship at the office, mister." Caldwell's voice was calm, but a sharp blade hid beneath the surface. He didn't yell. He simply stated the facts. "Your mother-in-law is suffering from a terminal illness, and her treatments and facility care cost thousands of dollars a month. Clara gasped at the CEO's words. Mom, you're terminally ill? She looked at me, her voice trembling. I slowly shook my head. I was perfectly healthy. I hadn't even visited a hospital recently. Harrison had been spreading a horrifying lie at his company. Furthermore, you claimed your wife Clara had a nervous breakdown and was entirely incapable of managing the household, Mr. Caldwell continued. Harrison's face turned the color of ash. Your colleagues felt so much sympathy for your brave struggle to support your family that they even took up a collection for you. I stared intently at the manila envelope on the floor. Harrison had used Clara and me as props to solicit money at work. But beyond that, he was using his status as a tragic husband to hide something much darker. I had stayed silent all this time because I only wanted to protect my daughter's smile. But if my silence was instead suffocating her and empowering a monster, I had no reason to hesitate anymore. Mr. Caldwell, things just got blown out of proportion. Harrison started making excuses, his voice strained. Looking at his pathetic display, my anger gave way to sheer pity. Mr. Caldwell sighed quietly and reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. I figured you'd say that, which is why I came to verify things in person today. In the CEO's hand was a single piece of folded paper. Harrison, this is the medical diagnosis under the name Eleanor Vance that you submitted to the corporate finance department. The moment Mr. Caldwell spread the paper onto the coffee table, Harrison's knees gave out once again. The chief of medicine at the hospital where this was supposedly issued happens to be a college classmate of mine. The moment those words dropped, the air in the living room completely froze. Forgery. Harrison's lies were unraveling in the worst possible way. Mr. Caldwell's quiet revelation shattered Harrison's perfect mask. But what truly shocked me wasn't the forgery itself. It was the estimated cost of the fabricated surgery written on that paper. The dollar amount matched the exact appraised value of the suburban property my husband had left me, down to the last cent. I finally understood exactly what Harrison was trying to steal next. The medical diagnosis on the table listed an estimated surgery cost of exactly $300,000. That was the precise market value of the house Arthur had left me. How did Harrison know that exact number? A cold chill ran down my spine. My home was a bit far from the city, but Arthur had taken out a heavy mortgage when we were young, working himself to the bone to secure that property for our future. The oak tree Arthur planted in the backyard dropped beautiful autumn leaves every year. The scratches on the walls, the creaks in the floorboards, they were all proof of our family's history. Harrison had secretly researched the property value and was plotting to liquidate it. Mr. Caldwell kept his eyes fixed on Harrison. You submitted a special application to the company alongside this diagnosis, didn't you? Harrison could no longer form words. His mouth hung slightly open, his trembling hands gripping his knees. An application for the corporate executive hardship loan, Mr. Caldwell revealed. I caught my breath. Harrison claimed his mother-in-law was dying and needed to sell her house to fund her treatment. Therefore, he would buy the property at market value to move his wife and mother-in-law in, taking care of them both. He requested a $300,000 advance from the corporate fund to finance the purchase. It was a brilliantly constructed, terrifying lie. A devoted daughter. A reliable husband supporting his wife's family. It was no wonder the corporate executives felt sympathetic and wanted to approve the special exception. But in reality, it was a ruthless scheme to steal my beloved home, and he went as far as claiming I was dying to do it. I tightened my grip on Clara's trembling hand. Harrison, what exactly did you plan to do with my house? I asked quietly. Harrison's shoulders jumped. No, Eleanor. This was just a tax strategy, I mean. What strategy requires you to declare me terminally ill? I didn't raise my voice. I just looked him straight in the eyes. A person layering lies can never hold eye contact. Harrison's gaze darted around the room, desperately avoiding mine. It was to give Clara peace of mind. Harrison suddenly shouted, the desperate excuse of a cornered man. You live alone, Eleanor. If something happened to you, it would be a disaster. I thought if I bought the property, we could renovate it into a multi-generational home. Everything I did was for Clara. For this family. He spoke with such unwarranted confidence, as if he had performed a noble deed. Masking his greed with fake familial love was likely his standard tactic. But upon hearing those words, Clara let out a small sound. Liar. Her voice was faint and trembling, but it carried an undeniable ring of rejection. Harrison glared fiercely at Clara. Shut up. I'm the one managing everything for you. Normally, Clara would have cowered and looked down. But today was different. Holding my hand, her face pale, she stared right back at her husband. Last week, when you demanded my social security number and ID, Clara's words made Harrison stiffen again. You said it was to process the paperwork for upgrading my car. Was that a lie too? Tears spilled from Clara's eyes. They weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, intense frustration, realizing the man she trusted had deceived her and was trying to steal her childhood home. I felt a deep sense of pride in Clara's small act of rebellion. My daughter wasn't just a weak, frightened victim. Harrison, what kind of documents did you forge using Clara's identity? I demanded. Harrison clicked his tongue. I didn't forge anything. It was just preparation for an emergency. He spat the words out. But Mr. Caldwell shook his head slowly. Harrison, stop piling lies upon lies. The CEO's stern voice made the air in the room even heavier. The documents you submitted to HR already had Clara's notarized signatures on them. The finance manager noticed inconsistencies in the paperwork and reported them directly to me, Clara gasped. Furthermore, you submitted another bizarre document, didn't you? Mr. Caldwell pulled another sheet of paper from his pocket. It was a handwritten form on company letterhead. A power of attorney affidavit stating that your mother-in-law's cognitive abilities have severely declined, granting you full control over her estate. And shockingly, this had Eleanor's notarized signature on it. I couldn't believe my ears. Severe cognitive decline. He was legally declaring me incompetent, and he had forged my signature to do it. I hurriedly checked the inside of my purse. The zippered pocket where I always kept my passport, social security card, and the original deed to the house was completely empty. Memories from a week ago came rushing back. I had come over to help Clara with chores. Harrison, acting uncharacteristically kind, had said, Eleanor, please sit down and rest. Let me make you some coffee. During the few minutes I stepped away to use the restroom, he had rifled through my purse. To think someone so close to me was acting like a common thief. The realization made my blood run cold. Eleanor, that's not true. It's a misunderstanding. Harrison held his hands out, desperate to defend himself. But his hands were shaking violently, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. He could feel his perfect plan crumbling to pieces. What occupied my heart wasn't anger, but profound sadness. The precious home Arthur left behind. The place filled with warm memories of raising my daughter. To think he tried to steal it using documents paved with such horrifying lies. I felt the bottomless cruelty of the man named Harrison Sterling in my bones. Yet, there was still one thing I didn't understand. Why did Harrison need $300,000 so urgently? He didn't drink heavily, he didn't gamble, and he didn't lead an extravagant lifestyle. As a corporate logistics manager, his salary certainly wasn't low. Why did he need to secure such a massive amount of cash in such a rush? A nagging suspicion swirled in my mind. Just then, the smartphone in Harrison's pants pocket vibrated in short bursts. The low buzzing sound echoed eerily in the quiet room. Harrison jolted, immediately checking the screen. The moment he saw the caller ID, the last bit of color vanished from his face. Acting with unbelievable panic, he frantically powered the phone off entirely. Who was that on the phone just now? I asked quietly. It was someone from the office, Harrison replied instantly, his voice cracking. But Mr. Caldwell tilted his head in confusion. On a weekend night? Apex Logistics has a strict policy forbidding weekend operational calls. Harrison choked on his words. His Adam's apple bobbed heavily. At that moment, a certainty settled into my mind. The secret Harrison was hiding went far beyond just stealing my house. There was a much darker, deeper abyss behind him. And the next morning, a small incident would begin to reveal the true nature of that darkness. Mr. Caldwell slowly stood up from the sofa. Don't come into the office on Monday. Consider yourself suspended pending investigation. His voice was quiet, but it carried absolute finality. Harrison remained slumped on the floor, nodding weakly. I took Clara's hand and turned to leave the living room. Wait. Clara, if you leave, A desperate voice pleaded from behind us, but we didn't look back. Clara squeezed my hand back tightly and gave a small nod. We packed only the bare essentials and drove through the night back to my suburban home. Opening the front door, the familiar scent of my home enveloped us. I took off my shoes and walked straight to the mantelpiece where Arthur's urn rested. I sat down on the rug and began to cry without making a sound. I said nothing, simply rubbing my daughter's back gently. After what felt like an eternity, Clara's trembling subsided. Come, let's have some warm herbal tea. But first, We need to treat those bruises, I said, bringing the first aid kit and sitting beside her. I slowly rolled up the sleeves of the cardigan Clara was wearing. It wasn't just the fresh, dark bruises from today's assault. There were overlapping older, yellowish bruises that were in the process of healing. The marks visible at her wrists were merely the tip of the iceberg. Clara, have you been enduring this all alone? My hands shook. A fierce anger, far stronger than my tears, welled up inside me. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to worry. Clara began to speak in a fragmented whisper. She told me Harrison started hitting her about 6 months ago. He would come home irritated, kicking the walls and throwing things. And without fail, he was always terrified of a specific phone call. Whenever his phone rang late at night, his face would change and he'd rush out to the patio, Clara said. Her words reminded me of the scene earlier. The unnatural panic Harrison showed when his phone buzzed in front of Mr. Caldwell. That was absolutely not a call from a coworker. Someone was ruthlessly backing him into a corner. And all that stress was being taken out on my defenseless daughter. As I gently applied the ointment with a cotton swab, I solidified my resolve. I couldn't let Harrison walk away from this. I had to drag the real reason he hurt my daughter out into the light. The next morning, I let Clara sleep and began doing the laundry as usual. Going through the motions of household chores helped calm my mind. I picked up the cardigan Clara wore yesterday and checked the pockets, making sure no tissues or receipts were left inside. My fingers brushed against a piece of hard plastic deep inside the pocket. Pulling it out, I saw a thin, bright pink credit card. I didn't recognize it. On the back, in small print, was the name of a notorious predatory payday lender, and printed clearly on the front was the name Clara Sterling. I caught my breath. Clara would never take out a high-yield predatory credit card. Next to the card was a crumpled receipt. Unfolding it, I saw it was an ATM cash advance slip. The withdrawal amount was $10,000. The date was just 3 days ago. There was no reason for Clara, a stay-at-home wife, to withdraw such a massive sum. Harrison had forced her to open a predatory credit card under her name. But why $10,000, when he was already trying to steal $300,000 through my house? A $10,000 cash advance was proof he was desperately scrambling for an urgent payment. What on earth did he need that money for? I stopped the washing machine, gripping the card and receipt. This wasn't a simple domestic dispute or corporate embezzlement. He was trying to drag my daughter down into a bottomless swamp. I walked quietly back to the living room and sat across from Clara, who had just woken up. I placed the pink card softly on the table. The moment Clara saw it, her face turned pale again. Mom, that's... Clara, what did Harrison use this money for? I asked quietly. Clara covered her face. I don't know, but he told me. He said this was just the interest. If he didn't pay back the principal, his life would be over. The words that came out of Clara's mouth made my blood run cold. If the interest alone was $10,000, how massive was the principal debt? The number $300,000, the exact value of my home, flashed in my mind. Harrison was desperately trying to gather cash to cover up a monumental failure, and he was trying to force his wife and mother-in-law to clean up his mess. Beneath the table, I clenched my fists tightly. Suppressing the urge to scream, I forced my mind to stay cold and calculating. I could see my opponent's weakness. All I needed was decisive proof. But Clara was holding on to an even more horrifying secret. Mom, actually, there's something else besides what you found yesterday. When Clara opened her purse with trembling hands, I learned the true extent of the horror. The faint sound of the zipper opening echoed loudly in the silent room. Clara pulled a clear plastic folder from the bottom of her bag. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. Mom, he forced me to sign this. Clara's voice was hoarse and fading. I took the paper and spread it quietly on the table. Putting on my reading glasses, I looked at the text. Printed in large bold letters at the top was, Life Insurance Policy Application. My heart made an awful, heavy thud. In the section for the insured, it clearly listed my daughter, Clara Sterling. And in the beneficiary section, the name Harrison Sterling was boldly printed. But what shocked me more than anything was the payout amount in the event of death. The number listed was $1 million. What is the meaning of this? My voice was so low and shaky it surprised me. Clara covered her face with both hands and began weeping uncontrollably. Last month, he suddenly brought this paper home. He told me to sign it. I looked at the bottom right of the page. There was Clara's signature, alongside a forged notary stamp. The dark ink looked like my daughter's blood, and I wanted to look away. I told him no. I said I didn't need such a massive policy, Clara forced the words out between sobs. But he told me, The words Harrison spoke to her were unimaginably cruel. Adjusting his expensive tie in the mirror before work, without even looking back, he met her eyes through the reflection and delivered a chilling sentence. "This is the only value you have left to me." It wasn't a long tirade. He didn't yell. It was just a cold, dismissive remark, treating her like worthless garbage. That short sentence pierced my heart like a jagged blade. My chest tightened so painfully I could barely breathe. I deeply cursed my own foolishness for entrusting my daughter to such a monster. "You're useless around the house. You only add to my stress," Harrison had continued callously. "So at the very least, be useful to my life when you die. That's your duty as a wife." I gripped the coffee mug on the table tightly. The hot coffee rippled and spilled over my fingers, but to me, it felt ice cold. I didn't cry out. I didn't scream about what a despicable man he was. I simply placed the mug back down. It made a small clinking sound. I looked toward the mantelpiece where Arthur's photo sat. The smiling face in the picture looked slightly sorrowful. "Arthur, I made a mistake. I spoke to my late husband in my heart. I thought avoiding conflict was the best way to protect our daughter's happiness. I worried about appearances and ignored her subtle cries for help. And this is the result." He put a price tag on our daughter's life to pay off his debts. Harrison had planned to steal my house to get $300,000. But that wasn't enough. He was paying off a terrifying black market debt requiring $10,000 just in interest. To pay off the principal, he intended to use my daughter's life as collateral. This was no longer just a domestic issue. It was a war to protect my daughter's life from a demon devoid of human empathy. "Clara," I reached out and firmly wrapped both my hands around my daughter's cold, trembling hands, praying my warmth would transfer to her. "You don't have to cry anymore. You did nothing wrong." My voice was completely steady, the trembling from moments ago entirely gone. "This policy hasn't been officially processed yet. We'll cancel it immediately tomorrow." Clara looked at me with tear-soaked eyes and gave a small nod. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was so scared. I'm the one who should apologize. I'm so deeply sorry I didn't realize it sooner." We shed tears quietly together. But they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief, having finally found each other's hands in a pitch-black tunnel. I vowed never to let go of this piece of paper. It would serve as definitive proof of Harrison's monstrous nature. The forged medical diagnosis Mr. Caldwell held, and this psychotic life insurance application. The villain's lies were unraveling, slowly but surely. I stood up and went to the kitchen to brew fresh coffee. As the water boiled, I coldly plotted my next move. Where was Harrison borrowing money from, and why did he need such massive sums? Unless I uncovered the truth behind that, we couldn't fundamentally resolve this. "Clara, do you have any idea what Harrison might be spending this money on?" I asked as I set the coffee on the table. Clara thought for a moment, then shook her head. "He managed all the finances himself. He just gave me a set allowance for groceries every month." "Wait." Clara suddenly looked up. "There's something I saw last month while he was in the shower." Clara dug into her purse again and pulled out an old, worn-out bank ledger. "This is an old checking account he used since before we were married. It's separate from the joint account we use for living expenses. Harrison always kept the drawer in his home office locked, but last month, he had forgotten to lock it." Out of sudden curiosity, Clara opened the drawer and found this ledger. She said she got scared and instinctively hid it in her purse. I looked inside, but it didn't make any sense to me. I took the old bank ledger. Harrison's name was printed on the front. I slowly flipped through the pages. The first few pages were normal, showing small withdrawals. But the moment I turned to the final page, my eyes were glued to a bizarre sequence of printed text. Listed there were monthly wire transfers to a name I didn't recognize. And it wasn't just one or two. The exact same amount was deducted on the exact same day of every month with unnatural precision. And the moment I saw the recipient's name, I felt a faint sense of familiarity. I was sure I had heard that name somewhere in the past. The darkness Harrison was desperately trying to hide was sleeping inside this ledger. Staring at the page, I quietly began to formulate my next move. The name printed on the final page of the ledger was Valerie Dalton. Every month, on the 25th, exactly $4,000 was wired to her account. This wasn't a record of 1 or 2 years. I flipped back through the pages. The payments had been continuing without a single delay for over 5 years. I had a faint memory of that name. Valerie Dalton. I muttered out loud. The moment I said it, Clara gasped next to me. "Mom, that name." Clara's face grew pale again. "Do you know her?" Clara rubbed her arms. "Right after we got married, the house phone rang in the middle of the night. I answered it, and a young woman asked, Is Harrison there? When I handed the phone to Harrison, he panicked and practically ran out to the patio. The next morning, Harrison had laughed it off as a wrong number, but he had been sending $4,000 a month to that wrong number. This was no simple affair or infidelity. Over 5 years, that amounted to nearly $240,000. Why would he need to pay such a massive amount? And because he could no longer afford it, it's targeted my house and took out insurance on Clara's life. The dots were finally connecting into a single, terrifying black line. The next morning, I left Clara at the house and headed to my bank downtown. Before tearing down Harrison's lies entirely, there was something I had to do first: secure my own footing. The bank was slightly crowded. I sat on a sofa in the waiting area, clutching my old checkbook and my ID. "Number 100, please step up to the counter," the teller called out. "How can I help you today? I need to report my personal documents and ID as stolen, and I want to put an immediate total freeze on all my accounts." My voice was perfectly calm, but the teller looked slightly surprised. "A total freeze, ma'am? That means absolutely no withdrawals or transfers can be made by anyone. I don't mind. Please process it immediately." Harrison had stolen my social security card and forged a power of attorney. He lied that I had dementia, planning to take total control of my assets. But with this, any documents he possessed became utterly useless paper. No matter how perfect the legal forms he brought to the bank were, he wouldn't be able to withdraw a single cent of my money. The teller typed rapidly on her keyboard, officially locking the accounts. This was my first quiet counterattack against Harrison. As I received the confirmation paperwork, a small sense of relief spread through me. If Harrison thought I was a helpless old woman, he was gravely mistaken. A mother can become infinitely strong to protect her daughter. Leaving the bank, I headed to another crucial location, the office of Robert Kensington, the lawyer Mr. Caldwell had recommended the night before. Mr. Caldwell had assured me that Mr. Kensington was a brilliant attorney he had trusted for years. I knocked on the door of the office on the 3rd floor of an old downtown building. A calm gentleman with a mix of silver hair welcomed me. "You must be Eleanor Vance." Richard Caldwell briefed me on the situation. Mr. Kensington guided me into the consultation room with a quiet, soothing voice. I laid out the items I had gathered one by one on the table. Copies of the fake medical diagnosis and forged power of attorney Harrison submitted to his company, the pink predatory credit card found in Clara's purse, the $1 million life insurance application, and the old ledger showing the payments to Valerie Dalton. Mr. Kensington carefully reviewed every document. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock. "I see. This is incredibly malicious." Looking up from the paperwork, Mr. Kensington's eyes held a quiet fury. Forging a medical diagnosis and a power of attorney constitutes severe fraud and identity theft, and attempting to coerce his wife into a life insurance policy under duress is completely unforgivable. I nodded deeply. "Mr. Kensington, I will absolutely not forgive Harrison for what he did to my daughter and for trying to steal my home." I clenched my fists on my lap. But more than that, I want to know why. Why did he construct such a horrifying plot? Who exactly is this Valerie Dalton? I pointed at the old ledger. Mr. Kensington looked back down at the page. $4,000 a month. That's certainly an abnormal amount for a personal transfer. He thought for a moment, then began typing on his computer, investigating something. Richard Caldwell told me a bit about Harrison's work history. He was hired mid-career at Apex Logistics 7 years ago, after leaving another logistics firm. I nodded. That was before he married Clara. Actually, there were rumors of a minor embezzlement scandal at his previous company, Mr. Kensington said. I held my breath. Embezzlement. It seems it was never made public due to a lack of definitive evidence, but Harrison resigned immediately afterward. Mr. Kensington took his eyes off the screen and looked straight at me. Eleanor, I just checked the routing number for Valerie Dalton's account. The branch is located in a suburb of Chicago right down the street from Harrison's previous corporate office. This woman might not just be a mistress. Mr. Kensington continued quietly. She's likely an accomplice in his past crimes, or someone who has been blackmailing him for years. A cold chill ran down my spine. The late-night phone calls that terrified Harrison. The $10,000 in predatory interest and the $300,000 value of my home. The $1 million life insurance policy. Every piece of the puzzle was sliding into place. Right then, the phone on Mr. Kensington's desk rang. His expression changed for a brief second. Understood. I'll inform her immediately. He hung up the receiver and spoke heavily. Eleanor, that was Richard Caldwell. Mr. Kensington tightened his grip on his pen and turned to me with a grim expression. Harrison called HR this morning to officially request an emergency leave of absence. He was trying to use the CEO's suspension order as an excuse to formally process a paid family leave. I waited silently for the lawyer's next words. The problem is the reason he gave HR. Mr. Kensington looked down at his notes. He claimed his mother-in-law's dementia has rapidly deteriorated, and she's become violent. He claimed his wife collapsed from exhaustion, and he desperately needs to gather the relatives to discuss placing you in a locked psychiatric facility. He used this to demand they expedite the corporate hardship loan. A terrifying realization washed over me, dementia causing violent outbursts. Harrison was trying to paint me as a dangerous, incompetent lunatic. And not just to his company, he planned to drag my relatives into it to forcefully evict me from my own home. Eliminate anyone who disobeys by labeling them insane. The sheer cruelty of his method made me nauseous. Furthermore, Richard Caldwell checked Harrison's corporate phone logs and discovered something else. Mr. Kensington revealed an even more shocking fact. He has been making repeated calls to a specific individual since last weekend. Does the name Uncle Wallace mean anything to you? Wallace, I gasped. Wallace was my late husband's younger brother. After Arthur passed away, we had drifted apart, only seeing each other at Thanksgiving or funerals. He wasn't inherently evil, but he was incredibly vain and overly obsessed with money. His own business ventures always failed, and I remembered him constantly crying to Arthur for bailouts. Arthur, believing in brotherly duty, had helped him time and time again. Harrison had targeted him. Having stolen my identity but perhaps feeling the pressure of time, Harrison realized he needed an ally to ensure the sale of the house went smoothly. He fed Wallace the lie that I was dangerously demented and needed an expensive care facility. If Wallace agreed, it would provide the perfect familial justification to sell the estate. Wallace, terrified of being burdened with my care, would easily fall for Harrison's silver tongue. Mr. Kensington, why is Harrison rushing this so desperately? I asked, suppressing the tremble in my voice. To save his own skin, mister? Kensington stated the cold, hard facts. A woman caught him embezzling in the past and has been extorting $4,000 a month from him ever since, but he finally ran out of money to pay her. Harrison is desperate to protect his fragile pride, his corporate status, and the perfect facade he built. To secure that money, he doesn't care what happens to Clara. He doesn't care if he throws his mother-in-law into a psychiatric ward. The true motive he hid was disgustingly selfish. I gripped the handles of my purse until my knuckles turned white. Mr. Kensington, I refuse to sit by and let them lock me away, I said quietly. Mr. Kensington nodded slightly. Yes, it's time to prepare our counterattack. Mr. Caldwell and I will provide full support. The lawyer made a proposal. If the enemy wanted to hold a family meeting, we'd let them. We'd let Harrison spin his web of lies. The taller the tower of lies, the harder it collapses. The moment he believes he has won is the exact moment we strike back. When I left the office, the sky had turned a dull, cloudy gray. A cold wind tugged at my coat collar. But my mind was remarkably clear. I saw the enemy's goal and his methods perfectly. I no longer needed to fear the unknown. I went straight back to my house. Opening the door, the warm smell of chicken broth drifted from the kitchen. Clara was standing at the stove, wearing my apron. Welcome back, Mom. Is chicken noodle soup okay for lunch? Clara's face was still pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But her eyes held a small spark that wasn't there yesterday. It was the spark of someone deciding to live on their own terms. I walked into the kitchen and stood beside her. Thank you, Clara. It looks delicious. I pulled my invalidated checkbook from my purse. Clara, look at this. I showed her the book, now stamped void by the bank. I froze all my accounts today. No matter what tricks Harrison tries, he can't touch a single cent of my money. Clara stared at the voided checkbook, covered her face, and began to sob heavily. Thank God. Thank God. It was a cry of relief, knowing one of the chains binding us had been shattered. A small victory. Rubbing Clara's back, I told her everything I learned from Mr. Kensington. The suspected corporate embezzlement, the blackmailing woman, and his plan to sacrifice his family to protect his pride. Clara wiped her tears and looked straight ahead. Mom, I'll never forgive him for his lies. I won't let him do whatever he wants with your house or my life anymore. Yes, we'll end this together. Later that evening, as we prepared dinner, The landline in the living room rang. It rarely ever rang. Feeling a sense of foreboding, I picked up the receiver. The caller ID displayed a familiar area code. Hello, Vance residence. Ah, Eleanor. It's been a while. It's Wallace. The voice of my brother-in-law came through the line. His tone was heavy, laced with an exaggerated, artificial sympathy. I heard everything from Harrison. Eleanor, I'm so sorry you're suffering from such a terrible illness. I tightened my grip on the receiver. Harrison's trap had finally reached my doorstep. But I didn't get angry. Quietly, and with icy composure, I replied, Yes, Wallace. Actually, I was hoping to consult with you about that as well. This was the true beginning of our war. Yes, Wallace. Actually, I was hoping to consult with you about that as well, I answered. Over the line, I heard Wallace let out a breath of relief. I see. Just as Harrison said, you were feeling anxious about it yourself. Wallace's words carried a distinct tone of condescension toward me, the widow of the older brother he always felt inferior to. By pitying me, he was clearly basking in a sense of superiority. Harrison, Beatrice, and I will come over this Sunday. Let's discuss the future as a family. It's what is best for you, Eleanor. It wasn't a consultation, it was an ultimatum. It was obvious Harrison was pulling the strings. Wallace genuinely believed he was doing the right thing as the representative of the family, playing the role of the noble brother saving his demented sister-in-law. I didn't argue. I understand. I'll expect you on Sunday afternoon. I hung up the phone quietly. I walked to the mantelpiece and lit a candle for Arthur. Arthur, Wallace is being used by Harrison. But don't worry, I'll end all of this. Watching the thin trail of smoke rise, my mind grew even colder and more resolute. In the days leading up to Sunday, Clara and I prepared quietly but surely. Mr. Kensington sent updates daily. Copies of Harrison's forged documents and background checks on his past became powerful ammunition for the trap we were setting. Clara was slowly regaining her original strength. At night, I heard her in her room, going through old documents Harrison had left in his boxes. Mom, there might be other things he hid from me. I'm going to check everything. Her eyes no longer wavered in fear. She possessed a strong will to stand on her own 2 feet and uncover the truth. Feeling proud of her growth, I braced myself for the family meeting. Sunday arrived. Exactly at 2:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Wallace in a suit, his wife Beatrice in a flashy blouse, and behind them, Harrison, wearing an exaggerated look of exhaustion. Eleanor, it's been too long. How are you feeling? Harrison asked in a gentle voice, as if he truly cared for my well-being. He looked like a completely different man from the one who slapped my daughter and groveled on the floor just days ago. He assumed Mr. Caldwell and I only had a chance encounter and didn't know the full story. I had Clara stay upstairs. They hadn't seen her yet. I told Harrison she was bedridden from a nervous breakdown. Clara must be overwhelmed. I really need to step up, Harrison sighed dramatically, exchanging knowing glances with Wallace. They sat on the living room sofa. I served them coffee and took a seat opposite them. Eleanor, we need to have an important discussion about your future today, Wallace said, pulling documents from his briefcase. I heard in detail from Harrison about your recent symptoms. Severe memory loss, waking up angry in the middle of the night, wandering around. I stayed silent, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug. Seeing me not argue back, Beatrice dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Eleanor, you must have been so scared living alone, but you're at your limit. Beneath their fake concern, I could see undeniable relief and calculation. Wallace placed glossy brochures for a luxury Alzheimer's facility in the center of the table. We found a wonderful place. Harrison took time out of his busy schedule to find it. The brochures advertised a high-end facility requiring tens of thousands of dollars to enter. Of course, a place this nice is expensive. Your pension won't cover it. Wallace tapped a stack of consent forms importantly. That brings us to this house. We'll sell the property, and Harrison will purchase it. The funds will pay for a safe facility for you. It's the most realistic option. I stared at the brochures and the real estate transfer consents. Harrison had undoubtedly prepared all of this as the perfect excuse to extract the corporate hardship loan. Eleanor, it was a painful decision for me too. But to protect you and Clara, this is the only way. Harrison leaned forward, looking me straight in the eyes. Beneath his fake sincerity, his eyes gleamed with the absolute certainty that his perfect plan was succeeding. If I raised my voice to object, he would just claim my dementia was making me emotionally unstable. Defying his expectations, I nodded slowly. Harrison, Wallace, thank you for thinking so much about my well-being. I'm sorry to cause you such trouble. The moment he heard those words, the corners of Harrison's mouth twitched upward into an undeniable smirk. Wallace and Beatrice looked at each other in relief. They thought they had successfully evicted their troublesome relative without spending a dime of their own money. They thought they had won. I'm glad you understand, Eleanor. Now, please sign and date these forms. Wallace slid a silver pen toward me. But I didn't pick it up. Before I sign, let me ask Harrison one thing. My voice was lower and colder than it had ever been. How exactly do you plan to pay for this house? Harrison blinked unnaturally, but maintained his confident smile. Don't worry about that. I can cover it fully with a corporate loan and my personal savings. I'll take full responsibility for your retirement. I had been waiting for that exact phrase. I see. From your personal savings, I nodded, reaching into the purse at my feet. Tell me, Harrison. By savings, do you mean the account where a wire transfer is made on the 25th of every month? The color instantly vanished from Harrison's face. Wallace looked confused. Eleanor, what are you talking about? What account? I pulled out the voided checkbook and another crucial envelope Clara had found. Eleanor, what is that? Harrison instinctively tried to stand up, but his legs tangled, and he collapsed back into the sofa. Ignoring him, I turned to Wallace. Wallace, I have no intention of entering a facility, nor will I sell this house, because what Harrison wants isn't money for my care. The air in the living room shattered like glass and froze. Harrison is trying to steal the equity of this house to cover up his past crimes. Wallace and Beatrice gasped. Harrison made a strange, wheezing sound in the back of his throat. I watched with cold eyes as the moment of his complete destruction began. But the truth I was presenting wasn't even the whole story. Clara, who had been hiding upstairs, was about to descend with the definitive proof. Past crimes? Eleanor, what on earth are you saying? Wallace was completely lost. Beatrice dropped her fake tears and looked at Harrison with growing anxiety. I opened the old ledger on the table. Wallace, look at the last page of this ledger. Every month on the 25th, $4,000 is wired to a woman named Valerie Dalton. Wallace leaned in, staring at the printed numbers. $4,000? For 5 years? Harrison, what is the meaning of this? Harrison was sweating profusely, frantically tugging at his tie. No, Eleanor. I mean, Wallace. I was helping a relative pay off a debt. And there is no one named Valerie Dalton in your family tree. I've already had it investigated. My icy interjection made Harrison's mouth open and close wordlessly. The sight of a liar's narrative collapsing is both pathetic and comical. I quietly looked at my coffee mug. Why had I stayed silent until I gathered all this evidence? Because a man like Harrison will invent a new lie the moment he sees an escape route. I needed to trap him in a cage of his own making, in front of his own relatives. At that moment, the living room door opened. That money wasn't for a relative's debt. Clara's voice rang out clear and strong. The woman who cowered in fear just days ago was gone. She wore no makeup, but her expression was fierce with determination. Harrison pointed a trembling finger at her as if she were a ghost. You were supposed to be in bed. Why are you down here? Harrison tried to stand, but Wallace commanded him to stay put. Sit down, Harrison. We need to hear what Clara has to say. Wallace realized he had been dragged into a massive scandal. For a vain man like him, being associated with a crime was his worst nightmare. Clara placed a small metal lockbox on the table. Mom, I searched his locked desk drawer again. I found this hidden under a false bottom. Clara opened the lid. Inside was a stack of old letters. The postmarks were from 5 or 6 years ago. She pulled out the top letter and unfolded it so Wallace could see. Written in elegant cursive was the following. Harrison, I haven't told anyone that you embezzled corporate funds, but I won't forgive you for using my account to do it. If you don't take responsibility, I'll take this to the police and the board. Valerie Dalton, Harrison. Did you embezzle from your previous firm? Wallace's voice shook. And you used a woman's account and she's been blackmailing you? Harrison covered his face with his hands. No, that's a lie, he repeated like a broken record. I placed a hand on my daughter's shoulder. How devastated must she have been when she found this? The man she married was a criminal paying hush money, and he tried to put a $1 million price tag on her life to cover it. But Clara wasn't crying now. The eyes of someone who has decided to face the truth don't waver. You used me, Clara glared coldly at him. When you proposed, you said you wanted to protect me. That was a lie. You just wanted a convenient, respectable cover story to hide behind. Harrison looked up at Clara with pleading eyes. No, Clara, I truly love you. That embezzlement was a setup. Valerie framed me and extorted me. It was the ugly blame shifting of a cornered man. It was always someone else's fault. That was his true nature. I stared silently at the letter. If he were innocent, why didn't he go to the police? Why pay $4,000 every month for 5 years? Wallace and Beatrice were now looking at him with absolute disgust. Eleanor, it seems we've been deceived by a terrible man, Wallace muttered a quiet apology to me. To think I believed his lies and tried to force you into a facility. I am so sorry. I shook my head slowly. No, Wallace, you don't need to apologize. The one at fault is the liar. Suddenly, Harrison began to laugh maniacally. Ha, a letter? What does that prove? He stood up and slammed his hands on the table. It doesn't prove I embezzled anything. The police won't care. I can just say it's the paranoid delusion of my demented mother-in-law. He still thought he could win. He believed our evidence wasn't legally binding. A piece of old paper might not be enough to convict him. But he didn't realize the true counterattack was just arriving. Harrison, you're severely mistaken. I glanced up at the clock. It was almost time. I had agreed to this meeting not just to show Wallace the truth. Right then, a car pulled into the driveway. The doorbell rang sharply. Hearing the chime, a cold, arrogant smirk returned to Harrison's face. Perfect timing. It seems the people I arranged for have arrived. He walked toward the front door with an air of absolute authority, the floorboards creaking heavily under his steps. Wallace looked at me in confusion. Eleanor, who did Harrison invite? A real estate agent and an escrow officer, most likely. He planned to force the closing of this house today. He only invited you to act as a witness for the transaction. As expected, Harrison led 2 men in suits into the living room. Sorry to keep you waiting. This is the real estate agent and the closing agent to handle the paperwork. Harrison introduced them triumphantly. The 2 professionals, completely unaware of the toxic atmosphere in the room, offered professional smiles. Mr. Sterling, we were informed your mother-in-law is moving to an assisted living facility and wishes to sell the property. We brought the preliminary contracts, the agent said, holding out a business card. I didn't take it. I placed my mug on the table and shook my head firmly. I'm sorry you came all this way, but there is absolutely no intention to sell this house. It is a complete fabrication by this man. The agent looked confused and turned to Harrison. Mr. Sterling, what is the meaning of this? You said the family was in agreement. Don't mind her. My mother-in-law's dementia is advancing. She doesn't know what she's saying, Harrison lied effortlessly. Eleanor, are you still going to be stubborn? You don't grasp your own situation. Harrison sighed theatrically and pulled a document from his briefcase, slamming it onto the table. Bold letters at the top read, Divorce Settlement Agreement. Harrison's signature was already on the line. If you refuse to sell, I'm divorcing Clara, and I'm not paying a single dime in alimony, he glared at Clara. In fact, you'll be left with massive debt. That pink credit card you opened it in your name, didn't you? Clara flinched. I didn't do that. You stole my identity. The card is in your name. Legally, you spent the money. If I leave, you'll be chased by predatory debt collectors for the rest of your life, Harrison declared shamelessly. What a despicable man. To use his wife to cover his embezzlement, then dump his debt on her and run away. He valued his pride and his image as an elite corporate manager above all else. To satisfy his ego, sacrificing his family meant nothing to him. Do you really want to see Clara ruined, Eleanor? Sell the house, give me the cash, and everything goes back to normal. Do you really want to humiliate yourself in front of your family? Hearing this, Wallace shot up from his seat. Are you kidding me, Harrison? You lied to me too. Even vain Wallace couldn't stomach this level of cruelty. The dementia, the facility, it was all a lie? You just wanted to steal the equity of the house? You tried to make me an accomplice to fraud? Harrison scoffed. Shut up. Do you have the right to act high and mighty? You wanted to get rid of your annoying sister-in-law, which is why you jumped at my proposal. You're just a loser whose businesses keep failing. Wallace's face turned white, then crimson. Woo? What? I was trying to protect my brother's house. Oh, please. You just wanted a cut of the sale to pay off your own debts. Harrison's ruthless words left Wallace speechless. You're just as guilty. If this goes to the police, I'll testify that you conspired in the fraud. Can someone who cares about appearances as much as you survive a scandal like that? Wallace collapsed back onto the sofa. Beatrice gripped his sleeve, pale and shaking. Harrison crossed his arms. Satisfied he had silenced everyone in the room. He looked like a pathetic dictator in a tiny kingdom. Now, Eleanor, the peanut gallery is quiet. Sign the paper. Harrison rolled the silver pen across the table. It clattered to a stop right in front of me. The living room fell into a suffocating silence. The real estate agent stood frozen in the corner, stunned by the unfolding drama. Clara squeezed my hand tightly, shaking her head. Her hand was cold, but it held immense strength. Mom, don't. This is the house Dad left us. I'll be fine. Don't sign it. Shut up, Clara! You just do what I tell you. Harrison raised his hand as if to strike her. I stared at his raised arm. In the past, Clara would have cowered. But today, she didn't run. She kept her eyes wide open and glared right back at him. Hit me. No matter how much you abuse me, I will never submit to you again. Seeing her defiance, my heart filled with relief. My daughter was no longer a victim living in fear. Harrison, you truly are a pathetic man. I picked up the pen and slowly stood up. What's pathetic? I won. Sign it. No, you've won nothing. You've merely provided more evidence to tighten the noose around your own neck. I placed the pen quietly at the edge of the table. The doorbell that rang earlier wasn't the guest I was waiting for. That's why we are still waiting. Harrison frowned in suspicion. Guest? I don't care if you called the police or a lawyer. It's useless. This is a family matter, he shrugged arrogantly. My plan is legally foolproof. The debt is Clara's. The sale will be legitimate. Give up and face reality. His arrogant words echoed off the walls and faded. I looked up at the wall clock. 3:00 p.m. Right on time. Harrison, you have no idea just how foolish your lies are. The moment I said that, the doorbell rang again. Not once, but a rapid, demanding double chime. Harrison clicked his tongue in annoyance and marched to the door. I don't care who it is, I'm throwing them out. I'm the man of this house. He yanked the front door open, but the next sound was Harrison loudly gasping for air. From the living room, I could see his back turn as stiff as a board. Why? What are you doing here? Harrison's trembling voice echoed in the hallway. Standing at the door were the people he feared most in the world. Harrison stood paralyzed, his mouth hanging open, letting out a faint wheeze. 2 sets of calm footsteps walked past him into the hallway. Harrison, I heard you took an emergency leave to quickly sell your family home. I was concerned, so I came to check on you. The low, heavy voice carrying absolute authority belonged to Richard Caldwell, CEO of Apex Logistics. Right behind him stood Robert Kensington, the sharp-eyed attorney. Harrison stumbled backward as if he had seen the Grim Reaper. Mr. Caldwell. Why today? You told HR that your mother-in-law's dementia had worsened and she was becoming violent, so you needed to urgently gather relatives to institutionalize her. As your boss, and more importantly, as a former protege of the great Arthur Vance who built this home, I wanted to help. Mr. Caldwell's words were dripping with icy fury masked as concern. Harrison shook his head frantically, his face completely drained of blood. No, this is a family matter. It has nothing to do with the company. Please leave. Mr. Caldwell completely ignored him and stepped into the living room. Mr. Kensington followed. Wallace and Beatrice stared in shock at these authoritative strangers. The 2 real estate agents in the corner exchanged nervous glances, sensing the catastrophic shift in the room's dynamic. I stood up and bowed deeply to Mr. Caldwell and Mr. Kensington. Thank you for coming on your day off. Not at all, Eleanor. I cannot allow my mentor's beloved home to be stolen through despicable lies. Mr. Caldwell turned to the real estate agents. I am the CEO of the firm where this man is employed. And this is Attorney Kensington. I apologize, but the sale of this house is entirely void. This man was attempting to illegally sell his mother-in-law's property using fabricated reasons. The moment they heard the word attorney, the agents' faces dropped. Being involved in a fraudulent transaction was career suicide. I see. We were merely called by Mr. Sterling. We'll be taking our leave immediately. They practically sprinted out the door. Harrison yelled, Wait! We're signing the contract today. But they didn't look back. The heavy thud of the front door closing was the sound of Harrison's escape route being permanently sealed. A heavy silence descended on the living room. I went to the kitchen and poured fresh cups of Earl Grey tea for Mr. Caldwell and Mr. Kensington. The only sound was the tea pouring into the porcelain cups. Harrison had collapsed onto the arm of the sofa, holding his head in his hands. Wallace nervously addressed Mr. Caldwell. Excuse me, sir. What do you mean he used fabricated reasons? Wallace's voice shook, realizing how close he came to aiding a crime. Mr. Caldwell looked straight at Wallace. You must be Harrison's uncle by marriage. Harrison came to me claiming Eleanor was suffering from severe dementia, and on top of that, had a terminal illness requiring massive surgery fees. He aggressively applied for a corporate hardship loan. Wallace and Beatrice gasped. Surgery fees? He never mentioned a terminal illness to us. Yes. And he submitted a forged medical diagnosis under Eleanor's name to our HR department. Mr. Caldwell pulled a copy of the forged document from his pocket and laid it on the table. Wallace stared at the $300,000 figure and was left completely speechless. You submitted a fake diagnosis to your company to borrow money? Wallace's hands shook uncontrollably. You told me it was just for a care facility. Harrison couldn't look up. He just kept muttering, no, no, like a broken machine. He had fed his company the lie of a terminal illness, and his family the lie of dementia. He tailored his lies to whoever was listening, trying to manipulate everyone. But now, those two lies collided in the worst possible way. This was the true purpose of the trap I laid, disguised as a family meeting. Harrison thought he was using his relatives to corner me. In reality, Mr. Caldwell and I used it as the stage to expose every single one of his lies under the glaring sun. Mr. Kensington stepped forward. Forging a medical diagnosis is a felony. Furthermore, attempting to illegally extract funds from a corporate entity constitutes attempted fraud. His cold, clinical tone chipped away at Harrison's sanity. That's not all. Mr. Sterling, you also attempted to coerce your wife, Clara, into signing a $1 million life insurance policy, naming you as the sole beneficiary. Mr. Kensington presented the copy of the application. Beatrice let out a small shriek and covered her mouth. Wallace stared at Harrison in absolute horror. You tried to turn your own wife's life into cash? Harrison snapped his head up. His eyes were bloodshot, driven by a manic desperation. No, it's just insurance. It's normal to prepare for emergencies. And did you see the pink card? Clara racked up $10,000 in predatory debt behind my back. I was trying to sell the house to save her from her own debt. It was a transparent lie to demonize Clara and justify himself. Clara trembled with anger and glared at him. You used my identity to open that card. I never borrowed a dime. Do you have proof? Harrison spit wildly. The card is in your name. You spent it. Don't lie. Harrison still believed he could win this specific argument. Since the card was legally in Clara's name, he thought he could pin the debt on her, divorce her, and escape. It was his final, dirtiest trick. Lawyer or no lawyer, it's useless. Harrison panted, glaring at me. There's no proof I embezzled anything. That letter is just ancient history. Clara's debt is Clara's debt. I watched his ugly display in silence. How could a human being be so blind to their own sins? But his arrogance was entirely based on one massive oversight. I met Mr. Kensington's eyes. The lawyer gave a small nod and pulled a new document from his folder. Harrison Sterling, you're making a grave miscalculation. Mr. Kensington's voice was razor sharp. Did you really think we would corner you without investigating the exact moment you withdrew that money under Clara's name? Harrison's face froze. What are you talking about? You withdrew the $10,000 cash advance at the ATM in the downtown convenience store, correct? Mr. Kensington laid out the facts clinically. We need a police warrant for the security footage, yes. But we already have definitive testimony. Harrison's knees began to shake again. Testimony? Who? I never went there. Oh, you did. And you immediately wired those funds to another account, Mr. Kensington stared piercingly into Harrison's eyes. The account of the woman you've been wiring $4,000 a month to, Valerie Dalton. We located her yesterday and spoke to her directly. The moment that name was spoken by the lawyer, all the blood vanished from Harrison's face. His breathing became rapid and shallow. The air in the living room snapped taut. Valerie Dalton. The ghost from his past that he had been paying off for 5 years. The lawyer had already made contact. The castle of lies Harrison had built was finally ready to collapse entirely. She told us everything, Mr. Kensington said, about the crimes you committed in the past, and why you needed to urgently wire her $10,000 this week. Harrison backed away wordlessly. There was nowhere left to run. She's currently living quietly in a neighboring state with her husband. She was surprised by our visit, but the moment we mentioned your name, she resigned herself and confessed everything. Mr. Kensington placed several documents on the table. Harrison, you claimed Valerie framed you for embezzlement and extorted you. The truth is the exact opposite. Wallace and Beatrice leaned in to listen. 5 years ago, the one who orchestrated the embezzlement was you. You stole Valerie's login credentials as a finance clerk to authorize fraudulent transfers. Harrison turned white as a sheet. But Valerie noticed the discrepancies. When she threatened to go to the police and the board, you fell to your knees crying and begging her. That mirrored exactly what Harrison did in front of Mr. Caldwell after abusing Clara. He was a man who would effortlessly throw away his pride and beg for mercy the second he was cornered. You begged her not to go to the police, promising to pay everything back with interest as settlement money. She took pity on your pathetic display and agreed to accept $4,000 a month to keep quiet. It wasn't extortion. It was hush money for his own crimes. And last month, Valerie got married. She decided to cut all ties to her dark past with you. She issued an ultimatum. Mr. Kensington pointed at a document. She demanded the remaining balance of $300,000 in a single lump sum by the end of this month, or she would expose everything to Apex Logistics, $300,000. Hearing that number, Clara and I gasped simultaneously. It matched the exact appraised value of my house, the exact amount he applied for through the corporate loan. The dots connected perfectly. He was willing to sell the home Arthur built our family's history just to plug the hole of his own crimes. Furthermore, when you fell behind on the deadline, you begged for more time. She told you to wire $10,000 immediately. As a show of good faith, Mr. Kensington's cold eyes pierced Harrison. That's why you stole Clara's identity, took out a predatory cash advance, and wired the money. It was a flawless explanation. The puzzle was solved. Why he panicked, why he needed the house, why he tried to put a price tag on Clara's life. He was willing to sacrifice his wife's life and lock his mother-in-law in an asylum just to protect his elite corporate status. Elle lies, Harrison suddenly shouted, standing up. That bitch is lying. I didn't do it. Do you have proof? You're gonna treat me like a criminal based on a made-up story? He was clinging to his last shred of denial. Wallace sighed heavily, and Beatrice looked at Harrison like he was covered in filth. As for proof, Mr. Kensington calmly pulled a small USB drive from the bottom of his folder. Valerie kept the digital footprint of your original embezzlement, along with the original handwritten confession you signed 5 years ago. She handed everything over to me. That was the fatal blow to Harrison's heart. As for the ATM footage, I have initiated a formal subpoena process. It will clearly show you in your suit operating the machine. All strength left Harrison's legs. Like a puppet with its strings cut, he crashed down onto the sofa. Irrefutable evidence. There were no more lies that could save him. To think you were this rotten to the core, Wallace said, his voice strained. You lied to me, tried to institutionalize Eleanor, and tormented Clara, all to cover up your own crimes. You're the lowest form of scum. Wallace, who always cared about status, condemned Harrison with genuine disgust. It was the moment Harrison was entirely cut off from his family. Isolated and surrounded, Harrison looked up at Mr. Caldwell with pleading eyes. Mr. Caldwell, please. The company. I've worked so hard for you. Please, just don't fire me. Even after all his crimes were exposed, he was still clinging to his corporate status. It was beyond pathetic. Mr. Caldwell looked down at him with icy disdain. Harrison, do you truly believe you worked honestly for my company? Harrison froze. Do you think I only investigated the fake medical diagnosis? I had our auditors review every account you managed over the last few years. The CEO's voice dropped the temperature in the room below freezing. You've been submitting fraudulent expense reports and taking kickbacks at Apex Logistics as well. It already amounts to tens of thousands of dollars. A sound of pure despair leaked from Harrison's mouth. You may have escaped your last company because they lacked evidence, but not this time. Apex Logistics will be formally pressing charges against you for corporate embezzlement and fraud. The CEO's declaration meant Harrison's life as an elite businessman was permanently over. He clutched his head and let out a pathetic whimper. I looked down at him in silence. There was no need to yell. The blade of truth cuts deepest when delivered quietly. But this family meeting still had one final move left. The ultimate blow to shatter Harrison completely. And it would be delivered by the hands of the daughter who had endured his torment for so long. After Mr. Caldwell announced the criminal charges, a suffocating silence fell over the room. The ticking of the wall clock sounded unusually loud. Harrison slid off the sofa and fell to his knees on the floor, weakly shaking his head. No. I just borrowed it. I was going to pay it back. He muttered deliriously to the floor. His arrogance was entirely gone. I worked harder than anyone. As an elite, as a perfect husband. Why is this happening to me? Even now, he played the victim. Hearing those words, I felt a wave of absolute coldness toward him. Villains never admit their faults when they fall. They cling to their pride and blame everyone else. Harrison, you did none of this for anyone but yourself. You just wanted to protect your tiny ego. My quiet voice rained down on him. You lied to look important, layered more lies to hide the first, and finally tried to sacrifice the family you were supposed to protect. This is the path you chose. Harrison looked up at me with desperate, begging eyes. Eleanor, please help me. If you just sell the house and give me some of the money, I can be saved. For Clara's sake, please. His lifeline was entirely severed, yet he was still spouting delusions. I had no more words for this man. I simply looked away. At that moment, a figure stepped forward from beside me. Clara. She picked up the paper Harrison had slammed onto the table earlier. The divorce settlement agreement, already signed by him. She calmly pulled out a pen. Clara, what are you doing? Harrison reached out a trembling hand from the floor. Clara spread the divorce papers on the table. The click of the pen echoed in the quiet room. Exactly what you offered earlier. I don't want alimony. I don't want a division of assets. Clara's voice was stunningly clear and steady. I simply want to sever every tie to your existence right here, right now. That is my decision. The sound of Clara signing her name filled the room. The daughter who used to flinch at his footsteps was gone. It was the powerful sound of a woman taking her life back. Wait, Clara, don't abandon me. Harrison tried to crawl toward her feet, but Mr. Kensington stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Mr. Sterling, I strongly advise against approaching my client. If you touch her, I'll call the police immediately. Clara finished signing and handed the document to Mr. Kensington. Mr. Kensington, please file this. Understood. It'll be processed immediately. Watching the lawyer put the papers away, Harrison let out a scream of despair. Ah, no! My life! It was the pathetic wail of a man who had lost absolutely everything. But Clara's counterattack wasn't over. She pulled another manila envelope from her purse and dropped it on the floor right in front of Harrison's face. You said I'd be saddled with the debt you created? Clara's cold voice made Harrison flinch. That $10,000 predatory loan. You forged my signature. Mr. Kensington has already contacted the credit bureau and the lender to launch a formal fraud investigation for identity theft. Harrison's eyes widened in disbelief. Furthermore, when the ATM footage proves you took the money, you'll face additional charges for criminal fraud. Clara's words pierced him like icicles. And that's not all. Clara pulled several photographs from the envelope and laid them out. They were pictures of the dark, painful bruises on her arms and wrists. Wallace gasped in horror. Beatrice covered her face, unable to look. I went to the hospital yesterday and had a forensic medical exam done. All records of your domestic violence have been handed over to Mr. Kensington. Harrison stared at the evidence of his violence, completely at a loss for words. Whether you're arrested by your company or drown in debt, it is no longer my problem. But I will make absolutely sure you face the legal consequences for the violence you inflicted on me and the identity you stole. My daughter, who had only ever cried and endured, had chosen a path of quiet, devastating resolution. No screaming, just calmly laying out the evidence and sealing every exit. Seeing her dignified posture, my chest grew warm. If Arthur were here, he would have proudly said, "Well done. That is our daughter." She had shattered her own chains. "Clara, please. Forgive me. I was a fool." Harrison finally pressed his forehead to the hardwood, sobbing loudly. "If you leave me, I'll be completely alone." The man who had callously looked down on and discarded others was now terrified of isolation. What a pathetic, self-serving display. But there was no one left in this room to pity his tears. Wallace and Beatrice looked down at him with freezing stares. "Mr." Caldwell sighed deeply and shook his head. "Harrison, your perfect mask is entirely shattered." The CEO delivered the final verdict. "The place you need to go tomorrow isn't the office. It's the police precinct." Harrison convulsed at those words and collapsed flat on the floor. Only wordless sobs leaked from his mouth. I let out a quiet breath. The long nightmare of lies and cover-ups was finally over. Looking at Clara, she let out a small sigh, as if a tight string had finally snapped. But the story wasn't entirely finished. I had one final task to complete. I gathered the coffee mugs from the table and smiled softly at Clara. A new life was waiting just around the corner. Harrison lay face down on the floor, whimpering incoherently. His earlier wailing had faded. Instead, his back shook violently. He must have finally realized that every lie was exposed and every escape route was burned. The elite corporate persona he obsessed over was gone, leaving only a wretched, empty man. I looked down at him in silence. I felt no triumphant joy or thirst for revenge. I only felt a quiet relief that the long nightmare was ending. I didn't yell or hurl insults. Seeing him groveling on the floor without words was a sufficient conclusion. The silence returned, broken only by the ticking wall clock. The mechanical tick-tock counted down the seconds of Harrison's harsh new reality. Wallace broke the silence. I am so incredibly sorry. His usually condescending voice was shaking. Instead of protecting the home my brother built, I let my own greed blind me and tried to evict you. I'm ashamed to call myself family. He made Beatrice bow her head as well. I shook my head slowly and met Wallace's eyes. It's fine, Wallace. Harrison's lies were meticulously crafted. But understand this. I will protect this house on my own from now on. Tearing up, Wallace nodded repeatedly. Yes, of course. He then turned to Harrison on the floor and spoke coldly. Harrison, as of today, we are completely severing ties. Never show your face to our family again. It was a total excommunication. Harrison jolted, but he couldn't say a word back. Mr. Kensington took a step forward and placed a business card on the floor near Harrison's face. Mr. Sterling, my job is to hold you legally accountable as Clara's representative. I'll file the divorce papers. You'll be hearing from the police regarding the identity theft and domestic battery. His clinical voice acted as the final handcuffs on Harrison's mind. The same goes for the corporate embezzlement and forgery. If you attempt to flee or destroy evidence, an arrest warrant will be issued immediately. I recommend you turn yourself in tomorrow. Mr. Caldwell sighed. I have nothing left to say to you. He turned his back. There wasn't a single hand reaching out to save the man who had lost everything. Harrison slowly pushed himself up. His face was the color of ash, his eyes hollow and unfocused. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his prize tie ruined. He opened and closed his mouth trying to speak. But only a wheezing sound came out. The mouth that had spun so many articulate lies and insulted so many people could no longer form a single word. He stared at his trembling hands, then slowly turned toward Clara and me. He dropped to both knees and slowly lowered his head to the floor. It wasn't the calculated, dramatic groveling he had done before. It was a silent, collapsing bow from a man who had been stripped of all pride and vanity. But that silent apology would never reach our hearts. The time for apologies had passed long ago. I walked quietly toward him, stopping a few feet away. Harrison, what you tried to steal from this house wasn't money. It was our dignity and our peaceful lives. My voice was remarkably calm. Clara is no longer your wife. This house is no longer your escape route. Pack your things, leave immediately, and never step foot on this property again. It wasn't a yell, but the quiet command rejected him more forcefully than any insult. Harrison kept his forehead on the floor and gave a small nod. Like a broken puppet, he weakly got to his feet and stumbled toward the front door. He didn't look back. He didn't speak. He opened the door, and a cold autumn breeze swept into the living room. Thud. The heavy sound of the door closing echoed through the house. It was the signal that the nightmare was truly over. Silence returned to the living room. It's over, mister, Caldwell murmured gently. I let out a deep breath, releasing all the tension in my shoulders. Clara slumped onto the sofa, covered her face, and began to cry quietly. They weren't tears of fear, but tears of relief for finally reclaiming her life. I sat next to her and hugged her shaking shoulders. Mom, it's over. It's really over. Yes, it's over. You don't have to be afraid of anyone anymore. My daughter's warm tears fell onto my hands. I knew that in this house Arthur protected, Clara's new life was about to begin. The long, dark night had broken, and a quiet, peaceful morning was arriving. After Harrison left, Wallace and Beatrice hurried out as well. Eleanor, if you ever need anything, please call, Wallace said, bowing repeatedly, but I only smiled quietly in response. Moving forward, I would maintain a polite, distant relationship with them. I thanked Mr. Caldwell and Mr. Plass. Kensington deeply at the door. Thank you both so much for everything. You saved us. Not at all, Eleanor. I'm just glad I could protect my mentor's family. A weight is off my shoulders as well. Mr. Caldwell smiled warmly. Please, spend some quiet, peaceful time with Clara now. His words filled my chest with warmth. A month passed. The season shifted, and the large oak tree in the backyard began dropping its golden brown leaves. Opening the windows, the crisp, sweet autumn breeze flowed into the living room. Mr. Kensington called to inform me that Harrison had been arrested. During police interrogations, he had become completely apathetic and confessed to everything. Between the corporate embezzlement, the forged documents, and the predatory loan fraud, he was facing serious prison time. Clara's divorce was finalized without issue. The identity theft was proven, absolving her of the fraudulent debt. The chains that had bound us vanished entirely through the legal system. "Mom, coffee's ready," Clara's bright voice called from the kitchen. I turned to see her holding a tray with 2 mugs, a soft smile on her face. The dark shadows of fear were gone. A natural color had returned to her cheeks, and she was wearing a short-sleeved shirt instead of her heavy cardigans. The painful bruises on her arms had completely healed and vanished. "Thank you, Clara. The autumn air smells wonderful today." We sat on the sun porch and sipped our coffee. The gentle autumn sunlight warmed our feet. It felt like a lifetime ago that this house was almost stolen from us. The terrifying family meeting felt like a distant memory. "I think I'm going to start working next month," Clara said quietly, looking at her mug. "I saw a part-time opening at a cafe near Mr. Kensington's office. I want to start stepping out and building a life on my own." I was surprised, but overwhelmingly happy. "That sounds wonderful. The coffee you make is delicious. Take it one step at a time." "I don't want you to worry about me anymore, Mom," Clara laughed shyly. The daughter who was once berated for being useless was now stepping forward on her own terms. As a mother, nothing could make me happier. We would no longer depend on others. We would support each other. That was our new path forward. After finishing our coffee, we walked to the mantelpiece together. We stood before Arthur's urn and photograph. I lit a small memorial candle. The quiet, comforting flicker of the flame lit up the room. I closed my eyes and folded my hands. "Arthur, I'm sorry for the late report, but everything is resolved," I spoke to him in my heart. "I protected the home you left us. Clara is going to be just fine. From now on, the 2 of us will live happily, cherishing our memories of you." With my eyes closed, I felt like Arthur was smiling warmly at me. Perhaps it was Arthur's guidance that brought Mr. Caldwell to us. His love had transcended time to save our family. That profound realization filled my heart with peace. Beside me, Clara had her hands folded in prayer as well. Her profile looked so calm, radiating the strength of an independent woman. We opened our eyes. The smiling face of Arthur in the photograph looked just a little bit prouder. We took a deep breath. The house was filled with bright sunlight and a gentle breeze. Everything we almost lost had returned to us. No, it had returned as a bond much stronger and more certain than before. There may be challenges in the future, but the way we are now, we can overcome anything. I looked at Clara and gave her a genuine smile. "Now how about lunch? I'll make your favorite chicken salad today." "Really? Let me help." Our laughter echoed gently through the peaceful house. The lies and dark shadows of the past were gone. Our new life had quietly, but certainly, begun.